It's not bad luck. It's not the economy. It's not your childhood, your ex, your boss, or the time you think you don't have. You're still stuck because somewhere deep beneath your daily life, your rituals, your noise, you've made peace with your own imprisonment. And no one will tell you this. No one will hold your face to the mirror and make you look at the quiet contract you signed, the one that says, I'll trade my power for comfort, my truth for approval, my potential for predictability. That's the truth most can't stomach. Not because they're weak, but because they've spent years building a life around the avoidance of it. You made your pain a pet. You've learned to dress up your wounds in productivity. You've called it being realistic. You've called it being humble. But deep down, you know it's fear. Decorated, justified, cosigned by a world that survives off your submission. Stock isn't a location. It's a posture. It's what happens when the self you pretend to be becomes louder than the one screaming underneath, the one who knows, who remembers, who can't unsee what it feels like to live out of alignment. That tension, that ache, that exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix, that's not burnout, that's resistance. Resistance from a life you were never meant to fit into. Resistance from every yes you said when your body meant no. Resistance from the sacred parts of you that have been caged behind compliance. You are not tired. You are misaligned. You are not confused. You are disconnected. And you are not behind. You are betraying yourself in real time. This is the truth about why you're still stuck. Because your loyalty to who you've been is louder than your courage to become who you must be. Because your mind has become a museum of justifications. And every time a window opens, every time a door creaks with possibility, you close it with a thought that sounds like reason but smells like fear. Now's not the right time. I don't have enough experience. I just need more clarity. What if it doesn't work? Let me ask you, what if it does? What if the only thing between you and the life you were born to build is the identity you're too afraid to bury? Because becoming isn't about addition, it's about annihilation. You can't carry your comfort and your calling in the same hand. You can't serve two masters, the one who built you to fit in, and the one calling you to stand out. And this is the razor's edge where most remain stuck. They flirt with change, but won't commit to the death of the current self. But until you do, nothing will move. You'll keep reading, consuming, reflecting, planning. Stock not because you're not ready, but because you refuse to burn. And yes, it will burn. You lose friends. You lose versions of love that were built on your silence. You lose the illusion that the world owes you ease. But what you'll gain, self-possession, clarity so sharp, it cuts the noise from your mind before it becomes emotion. Conviction that doesn't shout, but governs. Discipline that doesn't need motivation because it remembers who you are. You'll move like someone who doesn't need permission anymore. And when people ask what changed, you won't have to say a word. They'll feel it. Because when you stop being stuck truly, irreversibly, you don't return to the world. You reconstruct it, and once you've stepped beyond the veil of your own excuses, you start to see what was always there, not hidden, not withheld, just ignored. Truth doesn't knock, it waits. And it waited for you through your detours, through your distractions, through every false start and sabotaged breakthrough. It stood silently behind your shoulder as you convinced yourself that the cage was safer than the open sky. But truth is not patient because it's kind. It's patient because it's sovereign. It doesn't beg, it doesn't plead, it doesn't fight your denial. It simply remains. And the moment you stop running from it, the moment you finally turn around to face it, not with fear, but with fury, that's when the real work begins. Because clarity isn't gentle. Clarity is a demolition. It rips the comfort out of your rituals. It breaks the spine of your excuses. It lays bare the machinery of your mind and forces you to look at what you've been programming yourself to become. It whispers the question that destroys illusions. What would your life look like if you only did what was true? Not convenient, not impressive, not profitable, true. That question alone has shattered entire careers, ended marriages, sparked revolutions. Not because the answer is complex, but because it's clean. And clean truth is terrifying when you've built your life on what's acceptable. But this is where most stop, because clarity without courage is cruelty. You see it, you feel it, you know it, but you don't act. You retreat to analysis, to spiritual bypassing, to intellectual masturbation, anything to avoid the weight of your own knowing. And so you stay stuck, not from ignorance, but from cowardice. That's the real sting. It's not that you didn't know, it's that you knew and you did nothing. You watched yourself betray yourself in real time. That kind of pain ages the soul. But here's the miracle no one talks about. The moment you decide, truly decide, to no longer abandon your alignment, everything changes. The mind reorganizes, the body shifts, the soul remembers. You stop outsourcing your authority to broken systems, confused friends, and false idols. You stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, what matches the truth of who I've become? Because you've realized being stuck isn't a location. It's a language, and you don't speak it anymore. Now, every yes is laced with power. Every no echoes like law. You've tasted alignment, and now nothing else satisfies. You don't chase clarity, you enforce it. You don't seek peace, you embody it. You don't beg for breakthrough. You bleed for it, with direction, with devotion, with discipline. And if anyone asks why you're so calm, so clean, so sharp, so still, tell them the truth. You're no longer stuck because you finally chose to live without betraying who you are. And now that you've severed your allegiance to false selves, you begin to feel something you couldn't before: space, not emptiness, capacity, a vast, charged silence inside you that no longer begs to be filled with noise. The space to build, to shape, to embody, not the person the world conditioned you to be, but the presence you were born to command. This space isn't quiet because it's empty. It's quiet because it's ready. Ready for architecture, ready for fire, ready for the truth of direction that doesn't fluctuate with mood or opinion. Because now you're done confusing busyness with purpose. You're done running in circles and calling it growth. You're done collecting tools you'll never use, sitting in circles where people call healing what is actually avoidance. You've stopped worshiping the performance of progress and started honoring the precision of alignment. Your every movement now is calculated not because you're rigid, but because you refuse to waste anything. Not your time, not your words, not your energy. This is what happens when you finally stop being stuck. You become surgical. With who you give your focus to, with what you say yes to, with how you train your mind to obey your will. You no longer debate your path. You walk it. You no longer ask for signs. You become one. And when friction arises, because it will, you don't panic, you don't spiral, you don't regress. You adapt, not emotionally, but architecturally. You shift without losing center. You pivot without breaking pace. You respond without forgetting your aim. Because now your nervous system doesn't flinch at pressure, it interprets it. It decodes the signals your old self would have mistaken for danger and now translates them into data, into direction, into momentum. Your body has stopped bracing, your mind has stopped begging, your soul has stopped bargaining. Because you've remembered what it means to choose yourself, not as an act of rebellion, but as a return to the throne, to the core, to the source of who you are beneath all the layers you once mistook for protection. This is not reinvention. This is not rebranding. This is reclamation. You are not stuck anymore. You are ascending, but not upward, inward, to the level where nothing owns you, to the level where silence speaks louder than strategy, to the level where your life becomes so clean, so aligned, so precise, it feels like prophecy. And as you ascend inward, something shatters, not violently, but with elegance. It's the illusion that you ever needed to become something else to be worthy. You don't rise by adding, you rise by unmasking. by subtracting the lies, the false urgency, the inherited guilt, the hand-me-down definitions of success that felt like straitjackets sewn in the language of should. You realize all this time you weren't stuck because you lacked potential. You were stuck because you were wearing too many layers that weren't yours. Titles you didn't choose. Identities you didn't question. Agreements you didn't remember signing yet live by like sacred law. But now you tear every one of them off with the calm rage of someone who has nothing left to betray. You're not fixing yourself anymore. You're freeing yourself because you've seen what happens when the real you is buried beneath performance. You felt the dull ache of living as a translation of your true nature. And now translation is no longer acceptable. You speak in original language only. The dialect of devotion, the frequency of focus, the grammar of grit. And when you speak, there's no echo, only impact. You don't explain. You don't justify. You don't seek consensus from those still orbiting confusion. You are not available for emotional noise. You are not tuned into chaos. You are not compatible with anyone who mistakes your clarity for arrogance. You are not seeking safety anymore because your integrity is the safety. And it shields you better than any crowd ever could. This is the secret. This is the shift. The moment your clarity becomes louder than their confusion, the moment your alignment becomes so non-negotiable, the universe itself starts reorganizing around it. Not instantly, but inevitably, because everything that once kept you stuck was never an obstacle. It was a test of your readiness, of your honesty, of your willingness to lose everything false, to gain one thing true you. And now that you've passed that test, there is no going back, no shrinking, no silencing, no slowing for the comfort of the crowd. You don't dilute for proximity anymore. You amplify in solitude. And in that solitude, you arrive fully, finally, unapologetically, as the self who no longer explains their becoming, they embody it. And now that you embody it, not just in words, not just in rituals, but in rhythm, you begin to realize something else. You were never meant to escape the maze. You were meant to burn it, to stop mapping every dead end, stop tracing every wall looking for the same false door, because the exit was never external. The exit was always an exorcism of the patterns that kept you spinning, of the permissions you kept waiting for, of the stories you kept telling yourself to justify staying small. This is what they don't teach you. Transformation is not polite. It doesn't knock. It doesn't wait. It doesn't offer you a safe word. It demands rupture, a severing of every identity you wore just to survive people who never saw you, a breaking of the bones you bent to fit into a world that was never built for your soul. And when it's done, you stand there, naked of persona, stripped of roles, holding nothing but truth. And that's where you begin. This is the true beginning. Not when you get the job, not when they finally love you, not when your bank account matches your dream board, but when you can sit in silence, no mask, no script, and say, this is who I am, and I will no longer abandon it. Quite. That is the moment the real life begins, the life not made of borrowed blueprints, the life not negotiated through shame, the life not postponed until the right moment, the right person, the right sign. Because you are the sign, you are the moment, you are the mirror that reflects back to the world what it forgot, that power doesn't come from what you have. It comes from what you refuse to lose again. And what you refuse to lose now is you. So you move different. Not faster, not louder, just cleaner. You don't chase opportunity. You match vibration. You don't argue with the unready. You close the door gently. You don't explain the fire inside you. You let it warm or burn. And whatever cannot withstand your heat was never meant to hold your light. This is how you leave, stuck behind forever. Not with noise, with non-negotiable embodiment. The truth in motion, the soul unleashed, the life finally yours. And now that the life is yours fully, truly, without filter or footnote, you begin to walk with a different kind of gravity, not heaviness, density. You carry more presence in one breath than most people conjure in a lifetime. Not because you're louder, but because you are whole. You are not leaking anymore. No energy escapes through unspoken resentment. No time bleeds through procrastination. No potential drains into fantasies of who you could be someday, because someday has died, and in its place stands now. You walk like someone who knows that arrival is not a destination. It's a decision. And you made it. Not with ceremony, not with spectacle, but with the daily violence of choosing truth over approval, sovereignty over sympathy, momentum over memory, and in this new rhythm, everything changes. You no longer seek healing to feel better. You seek healing to feel clearer. You no longer crave rest as an escape. You rest as an edge. You no longer speak to be heard. You speak to cut through. You become someone whose words are not decoration, they're demolition, because now your honesty no longer asks for agreement. It stands on its own, forged in silence, sharpened by solitude, and anchored in a self no one else had the power to validate. And still they'll ask, how did you get here? And you smile not to be mysterious, but because there are no words for the terrain you crossed, only echoes. The echo of every morning you rose when comfort begged you to stay. The echo of every no that cost you connection but preserved your compass. The echo of every moment you refused to shrink even as the room grew cold. You got here not by chance, not by charm, not by anyone choosing you. You got here because you chose. You chose to see what most avoid. You chose to feel what most suppress. You chose to move when most pause, to burn what most keep, to become what most only imagine. And because of that choice, you are free. Not the freedom they sell you, not the aesthetic, not the illusion, but the kind of freedom that lives in your bones, the kind no one can give you, and no one can take. And in that kind of freedom, the kind etched into bone, into breath, into blood, you no longer just exist in the world. You redefine it without asking, without forcing, without even intending to. Your presence rewrites the rules simply by refusing to obey the ones built from fear. You don't rebel with noise. You revolt with stillness. A stillness that does not flinch when judged. A stillness that does not bend when questioned. A stillness that does not soften to be invited in because it creates the space. This is what happens when a human being stops outsourcing their life to fate. You become the weather. You don't forecast the future, you bring it. You don't wait for alignment, you are it. And it becomes impossible to be stuck, not because obstacles disappear, but because you no longer give them your name. You've realized the deepest truth of all. Stuck was never a condition. It was always a choice. A choice to withhold power, to delay permission, to live in a loop instead of a line. And now that choice is gone, discarded like a skin you outgrew, with no ceremony, no eulogy, just a clean break. You don't even look back. There's nothing left to save in the ruins of who you used to be. What you're building now cannot be housed in the frameworks that once confined you. What you are now is uncontainable. You love differently, not to complete yourself, but to reflect yourself. You create differently, not to impress, but to imprint. You walk differently, not to arrive, but to reign. And through it all, you never forget. You were once the one who felt stuck, paralyzed by possibility, drowning in maybe, gripped by the story that your power was somewhere out there, in another person, another place, another time. But you woke up, and now you don't wait. You decide. You don't beg. You build. You don't hope. You honor the self that crawled through fire to give you this breath, this moment, this command of self. And that command, that's the truth that breaks every cage. The key was never missing. You just had to become someone willing to turn it. And now that you've turned the key not out of desperation, but dominion, you're no longer asking the world to shift. You are the shift, not a flicker, not a spark, but a sustained, immovable flame. You don't burn to be seen. You burn because it's what keeps you true. The kind of fire that doesn't rage, it refines. You no longer rush into the world to prove yourself. You pull the world towards you with your presence, not ego. Equilibrium, not nuance. Now, because everything you use to chase safety, recognition, belonging now moves toward you on a current you created the moment you refuse to betray yourself again. That refusal is power. That refusal is prophecy. That refusal is the final severing from the sleepwalking version of you that once thought survival was enough. You no longer live in survival. You live in structure. You live in sovereignty. You live in a sacred order built not from external metrics, but from internal law. And that law is simple. No more hiding. No more waiting. No more playing small so others can feel comfortable in their indecision. You will not apologize for your evolution. You will not soften your truth to remain digestible. You will not dim to fit into spaces you've outgrown. You have earned your light through loss, through silence, through every breakdown that forged your backbone. And now you don't just carry clarity, you command it. The kind that breaks cycles in your bloodline, the kind that ends patterns in rooms where others still whisper about possibility. You are the possibility now. You are the one your past self prayed for, not to save them, but to replace them. This is what freedom looks like. Not perfection, not peace, but presence, fierce, sacred, undeniable presence. The presence of someone who doesn't need to be told they're free because they live like it. Every step, every breath, every choice. A declaration, I'm not stuck, I'm sovereign. And from that sovereignty, you no longer move to escape, you move to expand. Your direction isn't reaction, it's revelation. You're not guided by pain anymore, you're guided by principle. Not the kind written in books or etched into someone else's idea of morality, but the kind that rises from the marrow of your being, the kind that came from being cracked open so many times, only the real remained. And now you no longer need the map, because you've become the compass. You've stopped outsourcing vision. You've stopped crowdsourcing conviction. You don't need consensus to act, nor comfort to continue. You are the alignment, not because it's easy, but because you've made it inevitable. There is no longer a version of you that fears the unknown, because you are the unknown. You move first. You speak last. You carry silence like steel, because your silence now is not confusion, it's command. You are not calculating how to be received, you are calibrating what to radiate. This is the truth they never taught you. Being stuck wasn't about lack of movement, it was about lack of mastery. Mastery of self, mastery of thought, mastery of your inner architecture, so refined that even in stillness, you're unmistakable. And now people feel you before you enter. They brace for your presence, not because you dominate, but because you disrupt. You don't negotiate energy anymore. You set it. You don't adapt to rooms that lack clarity. You purify them by existing, not loud, but luminous, not fast, but fatal to mediocrity. And everything you touch now must rise to meet your frequency or fall away without ceremony. This is what happens when stuck dies. You become untouchable, not because you're untouchable by pain, but because you won't be moved by anything that isn't rooted in truth. Not because you don't feel, but because you don't fold. Not because life gets easier, but because you stopped choosing what weakens you. And now, your life is not a question mark. Your life is an exclamation. So here it is. The ending you thought you were chasing was never a finish line. It's a return to the version of you that existed before the world taught you to wait, before you learned to hesitate, to ask permission, to shrink your power into something digestible. A return to the truth that got buried beneath roles, expectations, and survival mechanisms that once kept you safe but now keep you small. You're not stuck anymore. Because stuck was never about the world around you. It was the war within you between your fear of losing what's familiar and your hunger to remember who you are. And now the war is over. You didn't win with noise. You didn't win with force. You won with truth. You faced it. You felt it. And you let it tear down everything that wasn't worthy of carrying your soul forward. So this is where you stand now, not at the end of your story, but at the threshold of your real one. Not seeking freedom, obeying it, not hoping for clarity, living it, not asking for a way out, becoming the way through. This is no longer about becoming something new. It's about honoring who you've always been. And from this moment on, everything changes, not because the world shifts, but because you did. And when you change, the world has no choice but to meet you where you truly belong.